In any violent act, there's also three components that are in action there, and we refer to them as the unholy trinity there. There's injury, penetration, and rotation. This series is in the penetration series. We're also doing a rotation series and an injury series. And what I mean by that, Ron, if I can use you for this, we already covered injury a little bit right there, so I think everyone understands exactly what we're talking about in injury. But in any one instance of violence, let's say not just the violent act itself, but let's just bring it down to one simple strike. Let's say I step in here and I punch the man in the spleen and break his ribs. So I step in and punch him and break his ribs here. In this one instance, three things are at work. There's an injury, obviously, those broken ribs and injured spleen. But on top of that, there's penetration, which is my body weight driving forward into his rib cage to drive that force into his rib cage, deform it and cause him to move. There's rotation. There's him rotating along separate axes as well in his body, and my rotation along my spine as well. So these different things are how we're going to use basically kinetic energy to create an injury and how it's being expressed, how we're utilizing those different ideas, penetration and rotation, to cause an injury. And as I said, in all violent acts, those things are obvious there at every single turn.
Yeah, one thing I think is important to notice here, that when Torin penetrated, so actually if Torin, if you could do that again, just go ahead and strike him. When Torin penetrated, what he did was he stepped past Ron. You'll notice that. He didn't step up to Ron, he didn't step in front of Ron. He stepped past Ron and then displaced Ron from where he was. So he's displaced the man and moved him back in response to that injury. This is very important, and this is what we're really going to be talking about a lot during the techniques that we're going to be doing on this series here for penetrate. But it's really important that you get that idea down, because by penetrate, we're going to be talking about penetrating like a bullet would penetrate the body. It's going to go through. It's not going to come up and bounce off. It's not going to reach just the skin. It's not going to go part way in. It's always going to blast all the way through. And when we say the word penetrate, that's exactly what we mean, because in order to cause that injury, you're going to need to penetrate all the way through.
Another thing, a phrase that we've used as well, is the idea of all of me all the time. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using my entire body to go in the direction I intend to go with full commitment, and my full effort is generated and focused on one simple thing. So whenever I'm doing this stuff, my obvious first goal is an injury. That's why I'm hitting the man. And so when I do this stuff, I want to make sure that I'm completely intent upon getting that injury. I'm going to use all of my body weight all the time for that.
Okay, guys, we've covered, what the overview of target focus training is, how target focus training uses violence, in the methodologies that we use. We understand that, the only way to get out of a violent situation is to create an injury, and we've covered that pretty much in depth. Now we're to the point of, we've talked about injury, penetration, rotation, and this series is all about penetration. Right. Specifically, when we talk about penetration, we're talking about striking. Now, most people, when they think about striking, they're talking about punching and kicking.
Right.
What we need to do is, could you elaborate on why that's really a misconception, and that's really kind of focusing on the end product of something that is useless without everything else behind it.
Right.
So let's get into it. Let's give the people an idea of what we're all about.
Sure. I think the most basic thing to throw out here, just at the very top of all this, is that, as Tim said, when people think about striking, they think of automatically of punching and kicking. But when we think of striking, when we use that term, we're not thinking about punching and kicking at all, because striking is not something that you do with your arms or your legs. It's something that you do with your entire body all at once. Essentially, the way you want to think about it when you hear us talk about it, striking has nothing to do with punching and kicking. It has everything to do with injury.
Right. Now, a lot of times, Ron, I'm going to borrow you for this one again. In a lot of ways, when people are talking about striking and they mean punching and kicking, the focus tends to be everywhere from this last millimeter of Ron's epidermis out. So I go to punch Ron, and the question sometimes is, how is my body aligned? Or one of my favorites, how is my hand positioned? Is it this position, or is it this, or is it this, or what impact surface am I using? And that's very, very late in the game. That's very far out of my actual goal here. My goal really is to discuss what I'm trying to do, and then make sure that everything that I'm trying to do, the constituents that make that occur, are accurate. So if my job is to break Ron's ribs and lacerate his liver, which is, of course, obviously an injury, then I need to work my way out of that. And what does it take to get that sort of impact trauma? Well, first off, it's going to take a lot of force. And the way I'm going to generate that is by using my body weight. So I want to make sure that I'm actually getting enough body weight into this punch to make it work, because I really, quite honestly, can't do it with my arms, and I don't have sufficiently strong legs to kick him the way that I want to hit him, which is with everything. And striking, in a lot of ways, is the simplest way to cause an injury. It's hitting a guy with a rock. It's hitting a guy with a stick. In some ways, it's hitting the guy with the planet. So striking itself is simply about imparting impact trauma, and it doesn't take a lot. Rotation, one of the other ideas, is about damaging the connective tissue. That's not really our goal here. What we're talking about is how to drive as much force into somebody as possible and cause the biggest injury you possibly can.
Right. You're going to get the most grievous injury possible by putting as much kinetic energy into the guy as you can get a hold of. Now, this is why we're not really interested in talking about punching and kicking so much. And this is because his broken ribs and his lacerated liver have no idea what the constituent parts that went into having that happen are. The injury does not know whether it was a fist that came in and hit him, whether it was a brick that hit him in the ribs, or whether the body was actually in motion and whatever it is that hit him in the rib cage was stationary, like the guy falling over onto the curb. Okay? The injury itself has no idea what the relationship of motion and energy is. It doesn't know if the kinetic energy was inside of the body when it was moving and it came to an abrupt halt. The body doesn't know, the injury doesn't know if there was something that had a bunch of kinetic energy built up into it that was coming into the body. This is why we make this distinction, because punching and kicking then would be just one way of putting impact trauma into the body, of transferring kinetic energy into the body. As Torin noted there, I think one of the big things that people discount a lot is that by knocking this guy down and having him hit his head on the ground, that's a strike. And a lot of people would look at that and maybe think of that purely as a throw or purely as a takedown. But in our minds and in your mind, you want to look at that more in terms of it's an actual strike. You're going to put kinetic energy into him. The guy's going to fall down because you've accelerated and put that energy into him. And it's all going to come out at the very end when he smacks his head down in the pavement.
Right. Striking, once again, is using your body weight to injure the man, however that is. Like Chris said, if it's a throw, you're imparting impact trauma with the earth. Your tool of choice, whether it just be your knuckles, a stick, an ashtray, a truck, it doesn't matter. And of course, the liver's not going to be able to differentiate, nor does it care. When it gets its injury, it's going to be doing what it says, which is sending out a signal that says, hey, I'm injured, and his body's going to respond accordingly. So when we're doing this stuff, we also have to recognize it doesn't take any large amount of skill. Someone shoving another person, having them trip and fall down, that's sufficient force to cause an injury. That's considered a strike. Striking people really is the simplest, most lunk-headed way of causing an injury. It's the easiest way to impart that trauma. So along those same lines, there's some stuff that goes on that we're going to go ahead and dispel right away, which is what goes on with the idea of punching and kicking, which is, well, if I punch and kick this guy, because I threw that punch or kick, he should be injured. And I'll be honest with you, simply because I throw my arm at someone does not always result in an injury. Sometimes it results in blood or a bloody lip, and that's great, but that's not going to end the confrontation or interaction between me and a dyed-in-the-wool sociopath. I bloody his lip, and he's going to still stab me. But if I actually impart sufficient trauma to cause an injury, and I commit to that trauma, and I drive my body weight into it, now we're looking at the sort of energy that can actually make a change. In this situation right here, if I'm just punching the man, I'm just going to make him angry. But if I drive all the way through and displace him, I'm going to give an injury.
Yeah, another really good way to look at this, another good example of this, of putting the most kinetic energy I can into this guy to cause these injuries. I can look at, say, a kick like this, where this is just essentially my leg strength. I'm just sticking my leg out and I'm using the muscles in my leg to try to throw that leg forward. And that's not going to have the same kind of effect as, say, a kick where I actually put my entire body weight into the strike. And that's going to put the man on the ground and make him hopefully break a wrist, dislocate a shoulder, and then smack his head on the concrete. Thanks, Ron. Pop on up. So the difference there, on the one hand, you could look at the first thing I did as a kick. But the second thing I did, I would think of more in terms of striking, because there I was using my whole body to put Ron, to put the biggest lump of kinetic energy into Ron that I could muster. And that biggest lump of kinetic energy is going to come from me using my entire body weight in motion through the target that I want to injure.
Okay, we've covered basically the difference of what we're talking about in striking. Guys, what I'd like to cover right now is the idea of, somebody looking at us when we're initially doing these strikes, I don't think they're really getting across the idea of what we're talking about, the kind of energy that we're imparting, and why we're not doing any setup motions. Why aren't we coming in with a protection? Why aren't we doing anything? Why are we so committed to the target going through and putting our body weight? What do those types of things take care of? And again, I think a lot of other people are imagining kind of a squaring off in a violent situation. And again, I have to reiterate, target-focused training is not about competition. This is not sport competition. This is not anything having to do with any sort of two people agreeing to a rules-based situation, nor is it for social interaction. This is not teaching you how to bitch slap somebody at a bar. Okay, this is about real life or death violence. And so what we're modeling the most effective use of violence. Again, we do not have a patent on violence. We're not telling you this is the only way to use violence. Quite frankly, as we told you before, a simple rock to the back of the head is very effective. It gets the job done. What we're hoping is these principles and methodologies that we're showing you is a more effective way to use violence. But we don't do things flippantly. The guys here are not just doing strikes with the idea that they think they have some invulnerability here, that they don't have to, quote unquote, protect themselves. There's a whole method behind what we're doing and why we're doing it this way. And this is probably one of the key points that you need to understand, because everybody else out there showing stuff seems to show it around, whether they think it or not, a sport type of an application. Right. And we'll explain more about that in the next coming minutes. But please pay attention to this.
Thanks, Tim. In the realm of martial arts and sport combat and self-defense and just about every other training issue out there, in the personal history, a history of personal combat, really, there is an interest in codifying and making clear exactly what occurs when two people are engaged in essentially a duel. For the purposes of warfare and of old school warfare, we can be concerned with that duel being multiplied repeatedly across the battlefield and across the line with a whole bunch of people dueling effectively. Ron, I'm going to borrow you. So this idea of a duel is that I intend to injure Ron intends to injure me, and we're both concerned for our own well-being. We both have our swords out or our tiger forks, or we both have our dukes up, and our job here is to get the better of one another. And in these sorts of instances, in the realm of dueling, we are both perfectly aware of what the other person is up to. And to be honest with you, that's pretty much the end of a social situation. This is where I've said enough about his mother that he's ready to get to business. We both recognize what's going on, and we both square up, and now we're both trying to get the better of each other. I'll be honest with you. No one has ever robbed someone at the ATM in that position. Violence, real criminal violence, doesn't occur with that sort of setup. They don't give you a lob and say, okay, now I'm getting ready, and I'm concerned about what you might do to me. In that situation, each of us is concerned with the other one getting one on us without returning it. In the realm of warfare, my interest is to make sure that I get in on him without him getting like on me. And quite honestly, a violent criminal is not concerned about what you might do. They don't come up to you and put a gun to your face and be concerned simultaneously about whether or not you can take that gun away. If they were, they wouldn't put a gun in your face. They'd shoot you from a distance. In any situation where someone's coming up to you to try to exact some sort of violent act on you for the purposes of criminal violence, quite honestly, they're going to assume that they can cause these injuries to you. They're going to take advantage of the concept of violence for their own well-being because, quite honestly, it's a stigmatized thing. The history of personal combat does not include any discussion about how to injure someone who's not paying attention, not expecting it, not prepared for it, because that's socially reprehensible. And it still is today. We're not saying that this stuff is acceptable. What we're saying is that it's necessary. And the realm of violence, quite honestly, has been stigmatized because criminals and the sociopathic people who use it are ostracized from our society, and they're essentially bad people. And they should be. But violence is a useful tool. It's the only thing that's going to see you through a violent situation. And if we stigmatize it and say, oh, well, violence is only for the realm of bad people, and only bad people use violence, then there is no option for me should this man come after me and try to kill me. Should this man threaten me with a gun to my head, and I'm not allowed to use violence because it's bad for people, then quite honestly, I have no options. At that point in time, I'm going to fall back on my self-defense training. I'm going to fall back on my sports combat training. I'm going to fall back on what I know from boxing. And at this point in time, it's not going to see me through. In a violent situation, or in some of my favorite parts, dueling, in a lot of ways, if people were injured, they'd be able to call it quits. If you got shot through the leg, and you could say that you're done, you're finished, and it would be all right. But in this situation right here, this guy's not going to stop. If I punch him a couple times, throw him to the ground, and say, let that be a lesson to you, he's coming right back. Or if not, he's going to find out where I live and try to kill me. So in these sorts of situations, dueling's not going to get it done. squaring off and getting prepared to see who's going to throw what punch next and seeing what options I have. Or some of my favorite discussion is testing him a couple times to see what his responses are so I can gauge effectively his chess game is really not reality. Any single amount of prison footage you can watch, I've never, ever seen it look like a sparring match. It always looks like someone just good old-fashioned putting the beat down on another human being. And that stuff crosses international borders. A South Korean riot cop beats a student demonstrator the same way as a Nicaraguan death squad member. It doesn't make any difference where they are, where they're from, what martial arts background they have. Knifing a human being looks like knifing a human being the world over.
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember, we led off with this idea, and it's we got to bring this idea back in, and that's injury, injury, injury. Because what we're talking about here, as Torin pointed out, rather than dueling, which would be a socially acceptable form of personal combat, rather than this idea of facing off and testing one another and seeing who's the better man, who's more highly trained, who's faster, stronger, etc., we're talking about criminal violence. That's where we're going to draw the line. That's what we're going to talk about. And you heard Tim mention earlier, this isn't the sort of thing that we're not training you to come out ahead in a bar fight. Okay, that is a social situation. It's a negative social situation, to be sure, antisocial even, but it is still a social interaction, intermale aggression. What we're talking about here is a complete breakdown of all social norms and all social conventions, such that all there's going to be someone who survives this situation and someone who does not. And he wants to do the same thing to me. This is what we're talking about. This is criminal violence we're talking about. All he wants to do is stab me to death. Okay? Facing off with him is not going to deter him from stabbing me to death, because he has a very simple plan to follow. It's take the knife and put it into me as many times as he can, period. He's not worrying about his stance, his footing, which hand he's got the knife in, switching that back and forth. He's not even probably going to let me know he has a knife. I'm going to know it's on when he sticks the blade in me, typically. This is how criminal violence goes down. And this is what we're talking about, because all of those social interactions, whether they're negative or even antisocial, all of this aspect of dueling, of facing off with one another, all of that is eminently survivable if I should end up on the bad end of that. It's all eminently survivable because it's essentially social. There are rules involved. Because there are rules involved, and typically those rules, as Torin pointed out earlier, that if I want to quit, if it's over, I just cry uncle or tap out or request that it be off or give him the social standing above me while I take a social standing below him, and all bets are it's all over for me at that point, and I get to go home with my tail tucked between my legs and a black eye. But what we're talking about here is a situation where if I simply roll over or quit or want it to stop, he kills me. That's what we're talking about. And when we're talking about this situation, the only thing that's going to work for you is injury, period. This guy wants to stab me to death. Nothing makes him stop wanting to stab me to death other than injury. Okay? He can't stab me to death if he's unconscious. He can't stab me to death if I've taken his eye out of his skull. He can't stab me to death if I bounced his head off of the concrete. This is what we're talking about. And the big idea here is that what happens with the idea of facing off and of testing one another is that nobody wants to commit to anything, because once again, there's a greater worry even than doing injury to him, and that is having him do something to me. That's the greater worry. So I'm not going to commit to anything because I'm worried that if I commit to something, he'll take advantage of it and use it against me. And so it becomes a negative feedback loop. I don't commit to anything. I don't commit my body weight and my total mass into any one strike. And so nothing I do causes appreciable injury. And then when I see that it's not causing appreciable injury, he's capable then of countering me, of continuing to wrestle around or do whatever else it is he's going to do. When in reality, if I commit to one thing and make it happen, and that one thing is debilitating for him, then it's all over, and it's all over in my favor. I think a really easy way of looking at this is the idea that if I have this guy here and I have a big burlap sack of rocks, and one thing that I could do is I could reach into that burlap sack of rocks and I could pull a rock out one at a time and throw a rock at him one at a time. And he's probably going to say ow and ooh and ah as I pitch these rocks at him. But what's going to happen is eventually I'm going to run out of rocks, and all I'm going to have is this empty sack. The other thing you could do is you could, instead of reaching in the bag and pulling the rocks out one by one, you could wind the top of the sack shut and get both your fists in it, take it up over your shoulder, and hit him in the head with it once. okay? Now, what do you think the difference between those two situations is? In the one, I pelted him with stones and made him say ouch and ooch, and maybe I've cut him, maybe I've bruised him, but nothing is appreciably changed in my favor. When I hit him in the head with the sack of rocks, the guy's head is going to go one way, his feet are going to go the other, and he's probably going to be knocked out. The other beautiful thing here is that you then have that sack of rocks to hit him with again. Now, to give you a physical demonstration of what I'm talking about, it's the difference between me coming up and hitting him in the throat and then jumping back and then coming in and hitting him again, then jumping back, because once again, I'm worried that any one of those things isn't going to do anything for me, so I'm unwilling to commit to them. And running out of rocks in this case is me getting tired, because by doing all this, I have to have a great amount of athleticism. I have to have a lot of endurance in order to last through, essentially 10 rounds with this guy of dancing around, of throwing jabs and feints and punches and counter moves and whatnot. When in reality, if I need to cause injury, I need to hit him all at once with the entire sack of rocks. So instead of me coming in and popping him and then jumping back, what I'm talking about here is striking, committing everything all at once. This is me grabbing the sack of rocks, taking it over my shoulder, and hitting him in the head with it. And it takes him down to the ground just like that with a crushed throat. Now there's no countering. There's nothing else that he's going to do other than be injured.
Just one point there. The other thing is that everybody's worried about in this, Chris, and you're pointing out, is really intent. Come on back out, Ron. When Chris stepped in and threw, say Ron had the knife, he had something here. When Chris was in here and taking him, as soon as the injury occurred, nothing changed with this guy. He's still just as mean. He's still just as intent on doing harm to me. He is still just as capable as he was before of doing violence. But he's a guy now that has a crushed throat, and he's going down. And I think that's one thing that seems to worry a lot of people, Chris, is they think they get so intimidated by the idea that here's an individual that wants to do violence on me, therefore I have to do all these special things to protect myself and not fully commit. But the idea is what makes this guy good is the fact that he is committing to whatever he is doing. And so we're not telling you that your idea of protecting yourself and things that you've been told in the past are necessarily wrong the way you were showing it. What we're telling you is actually your best option is to commit, penetrate, do exactly what this guy's trying to do to you, and everything goes away at that point. Because once the injury occurs, this guy's ability to do whatever he wanted to do to you changes. That's what makes it all go away. And I think that's the one thing we forget. These are physical beings that we're working with, and so we're trying to really change the whole process through the injury and take away all the advantages that this criminal had at that point and that he's been using.
Can I borrow that as well? The other thing that we have to engage here is perhaps this guy already knows the whole deal with the burlap sack and a whole bunch of rocks. And he's decided he is going to wind it up and use it on my head. And there I am, lamely pulling out a rock at a time, trying to hit this guy. It's not going to change the way this guy operates. And in our situations, we're not assuming that we're both playing by the same rules. I'm assuming that this guy is a criminal sociopath, either pre or post-convict. And I'm also assuming that this guy has every intent upon killing me. And quite honestly, at that point in time, the throwing the rocks back and forth works great if we both choose to throw rocks. But when this guy's winding up the sack and trying to break my head open with it and trying to get all the thoughts out of my head pinata, that's not going to work out so well for me. Because if he's coming after me, trying to bust open my skull, using all of his body weight, and I'm trying to stave him off, I'm not going to make a change in the situation that's going to improve for me. Chris, you mentioned this about the not really committing to it. And I just want to make it very clear. This guy knows what's going on. He's probably even done this before to people. Who knows? Maybe he's killed another man. Maybe he's killed more people than you've ever met. And if your best bet is to try to keep him off the same way as it works down at the local gym, this isn't going to work for you. Quite honestly, social skills are not going to work on this guy. Your ability to offer him a drink, to say I'm sorry, or simply back out of the situation are no longer going to pay dividends. At this point in time, the only thing that's going to work is violence, and to use it correctly, you've got to use it all. You can't just give him a little taste of it at a time. And so any situation where I might be worried about my own well-being, let's just use Occam's razor and cut direct to the chase. When you end the cause over here, it's over. If this guy is a threat to me and I end his existence as a threat, there is no more threat. There's no one wielding a knife anymore. There's no one who's a danger to my family. As soon as I knock this man unconscious or leave him non-functional, I don't have to worry about him anymore. I can go out the door or go into his friends. So it's important that we realize when we're causing these injuries, when we're committing to these things, it may be that he's already thrown a punch and punched me in my face, bloodied my lip, but I'm not going to be interested in trying to block what he's throwing. Because at the end of the day, if I'm defending myself and he's attacking me, our jobs are exactly the same. Somebody needs to live and somebody needs to die. And if that's what we're talking about, if the real goal here is violence, I need to use everything I've got, all of my energy, all of my ability to generate trauma, and dump it in this guy to end it as quickly as possible.
Exactly. I think that's really important. And once again, it gets us back to that basic idea of injury. Because at the end of the day, no matter what's going on, no matter what you think is supposed to happen here, what it boils down to is violence requires injury to be effective. It's as simple as that. The best way to create that injury is to have the largest amount of kinetic energy that I can get into his body on any time I'm going to make contact with this guy. And the way that I get that largest chunk of kinetic energy is to commit my entire body and to commit all of me all at once to crushing or wrecking one thing. So what it really boils down to then is it's not some kind of conflict between styles or who's right or who's wrong. It comes down to what you want the end result to be. If you want the end result to be that he is an injured man, and that as an injured man on the ground, he is helpless and there's nothing he can do to hurt you, then the way that you convert him into an injured man is by causing injuries, and that's going to require a total commitment of your entire body into wrecking one part of him at a time. And when you get that done, it's going to have all those dividends for you, if that's your end result. If that's not the end result you desire, then violence is not the tool for doing that job, because violence as a tool does one thing, and it's injuring people.
Next thing I'd like to talk about is what we call multi-strikes. Ron, I'm going to borrow you quite a bit for this one. Multi-strike means that I'm using all of my energy all at once, as we've established before, but I'm doing this now with multiple impact points. So I'm not just striking, let's say, on the average with a regular fist, where I'm just plugging this guy once, but rather I'm hitting with multiple things all at once. So 1 strikes, 2 strikes, where I'm hitting him twice, 3 strike, where I'm hitting him 3 times, 4 strikes, obviously, etc. There's going to reach, obviously, a maximum limit where you're running out of things to impact with. The other thing is that because I'm running out of my energy essentially being divided across the 2 of them, I want to make sure that I put as much as I possibly can. So it's never going to be me swatting at the guy with 2 hands, but rather me putting all of my energy in to make sure that each one of these is meaningful. So what am I doing here? In a multi-strike, I'm going to have the benefit of having one single point. And that single point is a place in space where I'm aiming for. So let's say if I'm going to be punching to both of both his liver and spleen here. My goal, let's get you this way a little tiny bit here. My goal as I step in, trying to punch him in the liver and spleen, is to converge on a point roughly back here behind him. So those 2 things are driving to a single point. So as I step in here like this, I'm able to hit him in liver and spleen, put all of my energy in there, and my hands, if Ron was never there, would have extended and touched each other. That is a single point that's converging. The other thing I need to do is also talk about the idea of them radiating from a single point. And that means that I'm starting from one position, let's say with my hands together, and then both of my strikes are being timed and worked from a single point outwards in this situation like this. And then I can also do sorts of things where I'm kicking and clawing, things of this nature, where I'm actually radiating out from a point. So I'm pulling my hands away from each other for strikes, or I'm bringing them back to each other for strikes. So this is a simple double strike or 2 strike. And then for 3 strikes, the sorts of things where you're putting 3 things in at once. So 1, 2, 3, and I'm hitting the guy in the solar plexus, side of the neck, the inside of the leg for the saphenous nerve, all at once. For multi-strikes, whenever you're doing multi-strikes, you want to put all of your weight in. Because as I said, you're going to be dividing it up. And if you just swat at the guy, any one of these 3 strikes by itself would be grisly effective. But if I'm not using that force consistently across all 3 of them, any one of them is just me making them mad. So I want to make sure it goes all in all the time. The other nice thing about this is it reduces the number of strikes, really the amount of time that you need to drop your body weight on the guy. Because if I'm hitting him 3 times, getting 3 targets with sufficient body weight to cause an injury, I'm getting 3 injuries for every round in the potential energy shotgun. So as I drop that body weight on him, I'm going to get 3 injuries. I drop that body weight on him again, I'm going to get 2 injuries. And every single time I'm able to do this, I'm reducing the number of times I need to be in contact with this guy, because the actual effectiveness of any one go is increased. That's one of the benefits of multi-strikes.
The big idea here to think about this idea of having a point, a single point that you're either converging on or radiating from. The big idea there is to prevent you from turning this sort of thing into simply something that happens with your arms and legs. Because as Torin demonstrated and as we've talked about, if I'm going to knee him to the groin and heel palm him into the lung here and chop him to the side of the neck, what typically happens is people forget everything that we talked about before. They forget about moving their mass, they forget about having structure, and it just becomes my muscles at that point. It's me swinging my arms. And what this idea of having it all either converge on a point or radiate from a point is to help you do those two things that are so important. It's to get your mass involved and then also to maintain the proper structure. So the way you want to think about this when you're thinking about having, say we're doing a 3-strike where I'm going to get 3 injuries at once to those 3 targets I just mentioned. I essentially want to think of it as I'm going to have my body weight plowing into him. I'm going to be dropping my body weight vertically, so I'm going to be dropping it straight down to get that kinetic energy. So I've got the kinetic energy from my lunge into a penetration. I've got the kinetic energy that's going to come from me dropping, once again, firing off around from that kinetic energy, that potential energy shotgun that we've talked about. And then lastly, to maintain my structure, you want to keep that idea that there's a point somewhere inside Ron that I want to squeeze all 3 of these things into. So the shot to the ribs on the side here, the shot to the side of the neck, and the shot to the groin, I want them all to converge inside there. And I want to make sure that you're thinking about that. And I'm going to think about that when I do it, as I'm going to crush them all together, squeeze them all together into a single point inside of him. And that's going to help me maintain my structure. So once again, instead of it being me doing this sort of thing here, it's me doing that right there. Thanks, Ron.
The other benefit here in doing these, when I do multi-strikes, as we already mentioned about being able to injure multiple things at once, the only problem, of course, sometimes is for your reaction partner. So while I might be more effective, I'm also, sadly, more effective. So when you're doing multi-strikes with your reaction partner, it's important that the targets that you're looking at, you look at very carefully and you see exactly what it is that you might be hitting. When you look off into space and you're doing 3 shots at once, any one of those, if you erred, could potentially really cause serious trauma for your partner. So make sure when you're doing multi-strikes that you look, if you're, let's say, including the eyes, the throat, the groin, that you look towards those and see exactly where they are at so that you don't injure your partner. Because I've done it before, many people have, where you're trying to do a shot to the side of the neck and the head and a knee to the groin, and you ignore the targeting on the knee to the groin and get a really good one on your partner. So it's important that you take care of your partner, see exactly where those targets are. What that also means for you on the street, because you know where his groin starts and stops, you can stop sufficiently for your partner here, and that can be the point of entry for that serious injury for the man on the street. So if you don't look at what you're doing, you'll always injure your partner on the floor, and you'll never injure the man on the street. So you need to always focus on those targets, and multi-striking makes that very important.
So now that we understand what it takes to hit him hard as you possibly can, we need to talk about making sure that you're doing it in the most efficient manner possible. And that's going to be using rhythm. So let me get Ron over here because we're going to look at this right now, make it physical. The idea of striking the person with rhythm means that I'm simply going to be hitting him 1, 2, 3, 4. And so instead of hitting him 1 and then stopping, 2 and then stopping, seeing what's going on, and then 3, 4, 5, and having it be all staggered out, I'm going to hit him with a nice, clean, simple rhythm. So I might go groin, kidney, neck, throat, takedown, something along those lines there. The importance of this is in what I'm doing with the injuries, because as we already covered, I'm going to injure the man, and once he has that injury, we're going to get a spinal reflex out of him. But that spinal reflex is going to last for a short period of time. It's not going to last very long. A shot to the groin, boom, he'll pop into the spinal reflex, but then he can finish that and come back out once the body has finished the reflex to protect itself. So the idea here with rhythm is to hit him while he's in that effect state, while he's doing that spinal reflex, to hit him again, because this is the part where the guy is helpless, because when I hit him to the groin, he can't prevent me from hitting him to the back of the neck. That's the big idea. Now, rhythm is not the same thing as speed. So you notice I'm not hitting him as fast as I can. I'm hitting him in a rhythmic fashion so that I injure him, injure him, injure him, injure him. And it's literally going to be that slow because I want to make sure that you get each and every injury on the man. So once again, the idea here, if I wait too long, say I hit him in the solar plexus, and I wait too long, he's going to finish that spinal reflex. And if I haven't injured him to the point where he's actually capacitated or debilitated, He can now grab me, punch me, do whatever he wants to do once he's finished with that spinal reflex. So the goal here is to hit him again while he's in the middle of that reflex. So I'll punch him in the solar plexus, break the ribs from the back, claw to the eyes, then kick him in the groin, and then from here stomp to his knee and break his leg. That would be hitting him with rhythm. So you notice the difference between rhythm and speed, because I didn't just blast off out of the starting gate and try to just mow him down or hit him 10 times in 1 second, but rather I was hitting him about once a second, maybe tops twice a second, in a nice stately fashion. But it was rhythmic. It was as if there were a metronome ticking in my head.
Can I interject right here?
Absolutely.
Chris is moving dynamically. So a very common error that we've experienced in teaching people is that they strike someone and stay rooted to the ground. So it's great for structure, it's very poor for movement. So Chris is moving dynamically, but there's a static distance between the two of them, meaning that no matter how much Ron's moving, Chris is always on him. He's always staying close to him and moving and striking. And it's important to realize that part of this rhythm is the process of movement. If you stay stuck in the ground, you start to play catch up, and then you throw your rhythm off, and you're not really using your body weight very effectively.
Yeah, so why don't you go ahead
Okay, great.
and lead in with that.
So from there, we have another discussion, which is using my body weight. So we've talked about it. So what does that mean in rhythm? How do I use my body weight effectively? Well, we've established also that as I drop my body weight, I'm going to start to run out of that use for the body weight as the guy starts leaving my fist. So I've punched him. He's starting to go away from me. Dropping my knees and bending my knees more effectively, more deeply, and dropping my body weight more thoroughly is not going to impart any more energy into the guy. The shot is done. The next question is, what am I going to do with that body weight? Well, obviously, I need to reload that potential energy shotgun and then hit him off with another shot. Reload, hit him again. Reload, hit him again. And that process of picking my body weight up in the air and dropping it back down for every strike happens consistently. Because gravity is a constant, I can only drop my body weight at a certain pace. So as I drop that body weight, as I step in here and drop this body weight here, as I pick it back up, this is me reloading the potential energy shotgun. I'm loading it back up again for me to drop some more weight the opposite way. That much can be done consistently. So as I drop at one pace, I load up, I drop at the other pace the opposite way. So that drop is one thing. I pick it up and I drop it again. Let's get you back up, Ron. So as I drop it, reload it, and drop it, I start to create a wave. And that wave really is the rhythm. That's the rhythm of my striking. So I can hit him in the groin, hit him in the kidney, hit him in the neck, and then kick him in the face, all with rhythm. And that rhythm itself, the benefit of that rhythm is that this man never gets a chance to recover. That effect state that Chris was talking about, keeping him in it, taking care of him that way, means that he never gets a chance to come out of those reactions. He never regains the ability to actually injure me ever again as long as I keep injuring him. If I stop injuring him, he becomes the same threat he was, quite honestly, more seriously so. If I stop injuring the man without rendering him non-functional, this whatever it was before, maybe he just wanted my money before, now he wants my life. I've injured this guy, I've blinded him in one eye, and if I stop now and this guy gets his hands on me, he's going to tear me a new one. So I want to make sure that I'm using my rhythm to stay on the man, consistently cause those injuries serially, and as I cause those additional injuries, one after the next, I'm going to be more and more effective at taking this man out after each strike. The cumulative effect is going to be much greater than me just hitting the guy once really hard, waiting a couple seconds and hitting him again. This man will never recover, he'll never know what happened, and it also helps for me getting him to the ground more rapidly. It's easier to knock someone to the ground when they're busy doing reactions. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Timing, I'm going to give you guys my favorite definition of timing. And timing is making something happen precisely when it would be most advantageous to have it happen. So in terms of doing violence to people, let me bring Ron over here so we can show you what I'm talking about. The basic idea here is I want to make things happen when it's going to be advantageous to have them happen. And to give you a good example, if I want to, say, kick Ron in the groin and then uppercut him to the chin, that's the thing I want to do. If I'm thinking purely in terms of speed, because speed has nothing to do with rhythm that we talked about before, it has nothing to do with timing. And in fact, speed can work at cross purposes to both of those things. But if I'm thinking in terms of speed, two things happen. One, if I'm just going to try to do these two things as fast as I can, what ends up occurring is I don't get the chin because his chin wasn't in position for the uppercut. Because once again, we know that the spinal reflex of getting the testicles crushed the chin drops down and juts out. And this is what I'm counting on, because I'm going to give him that injury, get this spinal reflex, and then I'm going to want to uppercut him to the chin to just crack his teeth, snap his head back, and take his feet out from under him. But if I don't have timing, it's going to be very difficult for me to get this done, because one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to go too early, as I illustrated there that first time, where I swung up and his head wasn't even there yet. I might catch him with an elbow to the teeth, which is, sure, bad for him in terms of dental bills. It's bad for me. I'm going to get stitches, probably have to have a tetanus shot, and who knows what else. So it's not efficient. That's the basic idea there. That's chaotic and haphazard. The other thing that can happen if I don't have timing is I can be too late. And what I mean by that is if I kick the man in the groin, he does the reaction, and then he wants to go fetal and curl up on the ground. If I try to do my uppercut after that point, obviously his head's not going to be there either for that part. Likewise, if I kick him in the groin and he stumbles away from me, I'm not going to be able to get my uppercut done. So what I want to have now is timing, and that means I want the uppercut to happen exactly when it would be the perfect time to have that uppercut happen, and that would be when his chin is at maximum extension, when he's in the deepest part of that spinal reflex, so that I can catch him square. So good timing then would look something like this, where you notice now his head was reflexing down into my fist. So I'm going to be able to hit the guy about twice as hard as I normally would, because he's going to help out with half of this. And then I'm going to follow all the way through with this at the end of that after I get that initial strike. And that's going to get me a good chance of a knockdown just from getting an electrical knockout and snapping the guy back and making him lose his balance and fall down, especially after the kick to the groin. But the idea there, you can see how the ways that I showed previously, where I'm either too early or too late, versus being right on time. When I'm right on time, when I have good timing, it's extremely efficient, because now I'm going to get Ron's spinal reflex to help me hit him harder. And so once again, just to illustrate, kick, and then now I uppercut with that complete follow through. Good timing gets me there right on time to get that done. Now a couple other examples of good timing. Because once again, it's all about having something happen when it would be advantageous to have it happen. Let's say that what I want to have happen here is I want to break Ron's leg by stomping on the knee for a base leverage 1 break, which would be hyperextension, as we covered in the joint breaking product. It's much easier to break that joint when he has his weight on the leg. So right now I'm not quite sure which leg he's favoring, where he has his weight, but I do know that if I kick him in the leg, he's going to step away. The reaction is he's going to try to retract that leg. Momentarily, he's going to shift his weight to the leg, then he's going to shift it off. So if I injure this leg, what's going to happen is he's going to momentarily shift that way and then pick his weight up and transfer it onto the opposite leg. So if I want to break this leg, the one that I initially kick, I have to have good timing, because if I'm too late, if I kick here and he already shifts his weight back, now when I go to kick this knee, he's not going to have his weight on it and I'm not going to be able to break it. But if I have good timing where I kick and then as he transfers his weight, I stand on that leg, I'll get the break every single time. So this is another aspect of timing. Once again, it's making it happen when it would be most advantageous to have it happen. And once again, that's something that's completely divorced from the idea of speed. Another example would be, let's say I want to knee him to the internal saphenous nerve to get the leg up in the air, and then I want to grab a hold of it to do a throw. Well, if I have poor timing, what ends up happening is this sort of thing right here. Now, his torso is between me and the leg I want to grab. It's going to be extremely difficult and kind of ungainly for me to get in here and get this done. And now I can't do my throw because I'd be lifting with my back instead of my legs. And that's just not going to work, especially if he weighs more than me, because we all know you're supposed to lift with the legs and not the back. So if I have good timing, and that means I know that there will be a moment where his leg will be completely up in the air. I know when that moment's going to occur because I'm going to be the cause of it. I'm going to knee him into the internal saphenous nerve, injure the leg, make him pick it up. And I know when that moment's going to occur. So if I have good timing, I can simply reach in and take what I knew was going to be in the air anyway. But once again, I have to have good timing. So instead of being too early or too late, I want to be right on time. So I want to come in, knee, and have a hold of that. And now I have my big throw on the end. So good timing gets me in there precisely when that leg's up in the air. Thank you, Ron. Torin, did you have anything else you want to throw in?
One of the nice things about timing is it makes you seem remarkably fast. Right? The things that Chris is doing, if the layperson were to watch that, say, damn, that Chris guy, he's awfully fast. In point of fact, Chris is working at the same old pace that he always does. It's that he's right there every time because he creates his own opportunities. So timing allows you to appear remarkably fast to the other guy without any of the detrimental things that speed brings, with a lack of efficiency, a lack of targeting, a lack of structure, a lack of control, a lack of efficacious striking. All of those problems that come from speed, you can throw away and simply appear fast to the other man because you're always in the right place at the right time. That's one of the other best parts that I love about timing. Good timing is implacable. You hit a guy and it feels like you're on him, and you're on him all the time, just like white on rice. There's no getting rid of you. And the good thing about having perfect timing is that you work so effortlessly because this guy's doing half the striking for you. He's throwing himself into punches. He's kicking his own legs out from under him half the time, and it makes it very easy to take people out. Thanks, Ron.
I think lastly what I'd like to mention is that to develop good timing arises out of rhythm. That's why rhythm preceded this talk right here. So a lot of people, once again, as Torin's saying, a lot of people see good timing and they imagine that it's speed. And trying to do these sorts of things or trying to learn good timing and develop good timing through speed, you're working at cross purposes. It's never going to happen for you. You're never going to be there. As I showed you before, what's going to happen is you're always going to be too early for everything. So rather, good timing arises from rhythm, from practicing rhythmically. And that's going to mean going slow, because the way you're going to develop good rhythm is by taking these targets sequentially slow so that you can learn the dynamics of how your body moves, how his body moves in response to the injuries that you give him. And then from there, you'll be able to develop a good, solid rhythmic base. Once you've got that rhythm down, you can begin tightening up the rhythm a little bit, and that's where good timing emerges from. So this is something that comes from repeated practice, but it comes from slow, sane, repeated practice that's rhythmic, and then timing then naturally arises out of that.
I'm actually going to do a physical example of that, because I think that's a very important point in this entire series, of course, is the idea of being able to work safely, and how that going slow is one of the things that we talk quite a bit about in the documentation. Going slow, how useful that is for the idea of striking. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and work with a liver shot, base of the skull shot right there. I'm going to kick up into the solar plexus here like this, and then rupture his eardrum. If I work that slow, that's as fast as I need to do it on the street. Let me get you over here, Ron. What you just saw right there is as fast as I need to do it on the street. I really have no need to go any faster than that. But if I'm going really slow, I can work on seeing exactly where my opportunities are for maximal follow-through and transition, so I can work smoothly. Let me do that again, Ron. I'm working in here, I've dropped my body weight, apply that force, and I can see exactly where my force runs out and how I can rapidly transition into this next strike. And how that next strike can be a wind-up for the strike after that. When I work slowly, I can see these nuances. I can find out where my problems might be. And by developing that rhythm and working on it nice and smoothly, nice and slowly, I can start to adopt that into being able to come in 1, 2, and being able to get exactly what you want, one right after the next. So when you work with that rhythm, you work nice and slow. On the street, I'm not going to be able to put the brakes on you anymore. You're going to go as rapidly as your adrenaline decides to make you go. But when your body is trained to get its timing, to get its targeting, and to work with perfect rhythm, it's going to work out excellently for you. Thanks, Ron.
I think lastly, all I want to do is drag it back to injury real quick here, because something Torin said just keyed something for me, and that is, and I know there are a lot of you out there when you heard Torin say that's as fast as you need to do it to really injure somebody. And there are probably a lot of you out there that called shenanigans on that, and there's no way you believe that. But remember, we're talking about injury here. We're talking about trauma that's going to require medical attention. As long as you are causing injuries, you don't have to go fast. You don't have to hurry up with this stuff. If I kick him in the groin and rupture those testicles, I have time to pick and choose what I'm going to do next. Obviously I don't have 10 minutes, but we're not talking about split seconds here, because I have time, as long as I've ruptured those testicles, so I have Ron here, to kick him in the groin, hit him in the neck, knee him in the throat, break his leg, and then now from here I can take all the time in the world I want to kick him repeatedly while he's on the ground, and there's nothing he can do about it. So thank you, Ron, as long as we're causing injury, all of these things work, but they all go back and point back to that idea of injury. None of these things will be exclusive from injury. So the idea of rhythm, the idea of timing, none of those things are going to develop exclusive of injury. They're going to develop after the idea of injury. The first thing and the most important thing is that you're hitting this guy, as hard as you can every single time to break things inside of him, period. Then on top of that, once you have that basic idea down, now we can start layering on the things that make you more efficient. Rhythm is going to begin to make you more efficient than simply just hitting him once and trying to break something inside of him. Hitting him serially with rhythm, breaking multiple things inside of him is going to make you more efficient. And then finally, building on top of that, we get to timing, where you're going to be able to get, as Torin showed there, the first shot and then the second shot right to the jaw, exactly when it needs to happen, right on time, causing those injuries. But you do not have such things. Rhythm and timing do not exist as a disparate or separate thing from injury. It always comes back to that.
And I think, so now we've covered the most basic strike. We've covered pretty much everything we need to understand about mass, movement, timing. We've covered injury. We've covered a little bit about targeting. We've also covered some of the basics of TFT already. So I think it's time for us to go ahead and get into the techniques. And so now you guys can see this stuff in action and get to the meat of the matter. Anything you want to add?
No.
Let's do it. Thanks.